Hey Chris, how you doing today?
Hi, Ron. Doing great. Looking forward to diving in. This is going to be a really interesting topic, talking about labs and lab results with HIPAA. I'm looking forward to
Yeah,
diving in today.
yeah, it's going to be a fun one. We've done actually, it's kind of interesting. I've been here 11 years and we've only done a couple of these over the years. And all of a sudden, just in the last 12 months, we've done, gosh, like half a dozen or more, right? Got a
Yeah,
whole bunch of them we've done recently. So it is really kind of exciting. And we can talk through a lot of different scenarios where we've done it. Um, but I'll go ahead and take, since we're doing the high level, and that's usually where I live, and you live in the deep weeds, I'll start at the high level and then I'll kind of hand it over to you. So, what we're really talking about today in lab results is potentially doing something simple. I've got a patient portal. I go to my doctor. I go get a strep test, a blood work test, whatever it is, a COVID antigen test, and they send it off to the lab. The results aren't immediate. When the results come back, instead of historically where I always had to wait for a week or two for the doctor to call me, schedule an appointment, and deliver the results, now in the patient portals, we're actually delivering the results immediately, and then it proactively notifies me, the end user. I log in as the patient, I go to my lab results, and I can see my results, right? So that's just at a high level, one of the ways we can post these results. So go ahead and break that down into the chunks of what it takes to do that. And then we can get into some of the nuances and some of the different types of lab results that we've done, some of the integrations and reporting and all some of kind of the cool features.
absolutely. Thanks, Ron. I think one of the most interesting things about lab results, of course, is that we are typically dealing with PII, PHI, and it's both of those in combination in a lot of cases. And of course, PHI with the scope of HIPAA is something that a lot of folks listening to this are going to be interested in how we deal with that. So I think overall, just having that as a concept here, fundamentally, the biggest thing that we tend to do and look at is where do we need to de-identify the communication so that whenever we are communicating and interacting, because there's a workflow here with lab results, right? A lot of times there's a physical device that gets sent, and then there's a physical sort of, fluid or some kind of something that's getting sent back that's getting tested. And this device and this lab test that needs to be run, we need to keep the process moving. And it's not just with the patient; it's also with the different analysis roles. There could be multiple steps of analysis, and so this needs to keep moving through a process, and ideally be really self-service and automated. And so doing that while having the information de-identified and then making it so that those who need the information at their particular step can get it requires that we have some form of multi-factor authentication and just robust security. And so these are all kind of concepts that need to be feathered in appropriately while making it still very user friendly, right? And so that's really the big opportunity here. Yeah. So I think a lot of this is it's really important when we talk about UI UX to sort of like manage the expectations that someone has going into it. So what is my experience going to look like typically? And what are the steps? And then where am I at this time in that process? So ideally, this is typically going to be visual. Usually it works well to have a number of steps. It's 3 easy steps. You're on step 2 right now. And this is the status, and, you can drill in to get more detail and basically see more information. And then you receive notifications in your preferred modality, whether it's email, text, a phone call, even. What kind of communication do you want from the system? And then in many cases, you have to approve that. There may be a mobile app or some kind of an application that's part of the lab test. That's quite common that we're working with a Bluetooth type of a device that uploads to a mobile app. And then the mobile app sends the lab data or sends the data so the lab can do analysis. These are things that, you're going to want to consider. And so ultimately, the big thing here is that whenever the user is interacting with us, we're wanting to make it so that they get a good status on where things are. And so I think it would be interesting to just kind of walk through a couple of example projects and just kind of talk through what those were. One of them being essentially getting a blood test to look for COVID antibodies and see if they
Yep.
have COVID antibodies or not. And so this is a pretty interesting one because it follows a pretty basic framework of going onto a kind of a standard e-commerce type of a workflow where I can purchase something, this lab test. And in order to get the lab test, I have to meet certain medical requirements. So I have to provide some HIPAA PHI information during this e-commerce checkout. So it's HIPAA e-commerce essentially. And then it moves from that purchase into going to a lab type of interaction workflow where we're actually sending out this package that's used for testing, and that has to get sent back with a blood sample in it. And it's very important that it be sent back timely and that it actually get delivered, because if not, it can spoil the sample itself, right? Which is a major challenge. And then ultimately, once the blood sample is to the lab, the patient who made the blood sample, they want to see what the status is, and they want to know, it's so crazy how it works with us as consumers, but like the second that we purchase something, we're so used to getting instant results. So it's really important that we manage their expectations of when they're going to see an update, what a typical cadence is. And so that entire workflow needs to be clear to the user. But then the lab itself needs to have a process that they can follow. So they're going to receive this sample. And whenever that happens, we need to have it automated such that the e-commerce side of things has pushed every bit of information we got from the patient into the lab testing software. So we're doing that behind the scenes in a HIPAA integration where we're actually integrating data from e-commerce, that's HIPAA e-commerce, over to a lab software and bringing all that information so that we're not having to double entry at any point. And this makes it really easy for the lab to then update the record. And then we're watching for that and bringing the status back into the e-commerce for the patient so they can see what the status is at any given time. I don't know if you want to add any other thoughts to that, Ron. That's very high level, but please feel free.
Yeah, I'm going to give just one level of detail to add to your example.
Please.
So the one piece of data Chris was just mentioning a couple of times there about pushing the data in. Well, I wanted to cover what that is. So two things happen. One, when I go to the website, the way we built it, I could actually buy 5 kits, right? I've got my son, my daughter, and her husband, and my wife. So I'm going to buy 5 kits. But I can't see the results of those because all 5 members are over 18. And for HIPAA privacy, I can't see the results. So basically what happens is I can go in and buy the 5 kits. I give a kit to each one of my family members. When they do the blood and send it in, the way that data is generated is they actually go to the portal and they register the kit. And when they register the kit, they actually create their own HIPAA portal that sends it up to, as you were talking about, through that integration to the lab. So when the blood shows up, they already have that quote unquote patient record, right? So when I send up my kit and they go, hey, here's a blood sample for Ron. Do we have a Ron Halverson in the system? They look it up, and sure enough, I registered my kit. And it says kit number 1234. They look at the vial, it says 1234. Yep, this is the sample for that patient, and that's how they sync the two. So then when they go post the results to the portal, they actually have a home to place that, and that's how that data gets there. So our e-commerce HIPAA portal sells the kits, also registers and creates the patient portal side when they register the kits, and then they can log in and see the results from those kits. And what I'll do is I'll post a couple screenshots on the webinar here, and we'll include those so you guys can kind of get an idea of how that works. Anything else you wanted to add to that, Chris?
I think that's really helpful detail. And I was just going to say, it's kind of a role reversal there where you're going into the really detailed part of it. And I think that's really helpful for folks. One of the other things that I'll just note, and this is just kind of as a side note, that a lot of lab test results, or even just the ability to get a certain type of lab test or test done, you may have to get an approval from a doctor to have it assigned to you or prescribed. And in that case, we have done a lot with workflow where we're automating the interaction with a doctor or a caregiver who would prescribe that, including the ability to go through an e-signature process for them to actually sign off. We also have the ability with these workflows, and we've done this in different cases recently, where we're also looping in a pharmacy role or a pharmacist role. So that's another interesting dynamic. And just like you said, I think it's so important that it's scoped to the one who is assigning or consuming or using that lab test, and that everything is essentially isolated for privacy once they register it to themselves. So I think that's a really good point. And so the big takeaway here is that there's a lot of workflow that can key off of this process. And if you were to sort of have some key takeaways, it's foundational that the expectations be managed on all fronts around what it's going to look like and where the bottlenecks are likely going to be. And you can do that up front. So you can have a very opinionated sort of expectation management for your patients, for your users who are purchasing this lab test process, but also for your internal folks who are delivering on it. Especially if, like the scenario I talked about, you have doctors and pharmacists, they may not be used to working in your system. So you really want to have a strong opinionated approach that's very directive for them and helps them to just follow this process that you have laid out. So that's one of the things that we see that's really key. And then, of course, like you said, Ron, really integrating the HIPAA side of it into every single step. So that we can make sure that the information is de-identified and secure, and that it's scoped to the particular person that it should be throughout that process. Now, there's a lot more that we can unpack on this, but that's really something that hopefully gives you a taste for the potential with lab results, with HIPAA, and some of the automation that can happen here. And Ron, I'll turn it over to you to wrap us up.
Yeah. Chris has mentioned de-identified data a little bit. If you want to see any more about that, I actually posted a video to the YouTube channel yesterday, so it would have been dated April 26. So if you go back and look for April 26, you'll find a HIPAA tokenization video that really dives into tokenization and de-identifying data. So that's really all I had to add to that. Thanks, Chris. Great topic. If you guys want to talk about your HIPAA project, and you want to talk through that workflow and you want to see some of those in actions, I've got a half a dozen of them I can show to you. I'd love to meet with you. Head on over to our website, clarity-ventures.com, hit request a quote, schedule some time with me, and hope to see you on a future video. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Ron. Bye for now.
Bye for now.